The early 1800s brought many movements for social reform in the United States. Possibly the most important was the movement to abolish slavery. While reformers worked hard to end slavery, many also took risks to help slaves escape. The abolitionist movement to end slavery was driven by social and political aspects for the immediate emancipation of all slaves and the end of segregation and social discrimination. During the 1830s, Americans took an organized action to supporting abolition. The Quakers were among the first groups to challenge slavery on religious grounds. Anti-slavery reformers did not always agree on how much equality they thought African Americans should have. Some supported same treatment as whites, and others were completely against full political and social equality. Abolitionists found many ways to further their cause. Some went on speaking tours or wrote pamphlets and news articles. William Lloyd Garrison published an abolitionist paper, The Liberator, in 1831. In 1833, he helped found the American Anti-Slavery Society. These members of the society wanted immediate emancipation and racial equality for all slaves. The abolitionist movement attempted to achieve the emancipation of all slaves and the end of racial segregation. These goals distinguish abolitionists from the broad-based political opposition to the westward expansion of slavery that took form in North after 1840 and raised more issues leading to the Civil War. By stressing the moral imperative to end civil practices and each person's responsibility to uphold God's will in society, preachers like Lyman Beecher, Nathaniel Taylor, and Charles G. Finney, in what came to be called the Second Great Awakening, led massive religious revivals in the 1820s that gave a major momentum to the later emergence of abolitionism. During the Second Great Awakening, abolition of slavery was fueled by religion, which pushed people to advocate for emancipation of slavery on religious grounds. The movement became well known in large churches and a large part of politics beginning in 1830s, which therefore contributed to the Civil War between the North and the South. By the 1830s, a loosely organized group had begun helping slaves escape from the South. Free African Americans, former slaves, and white abolitionists worked together. They created what is known as the Underground Railroad. This organization was not an actual railroad, but was a network of people who arranged transportation and hiding places for fugitives or escaped slaves. Fugitives often traveled along freedom trails that led them to the northern states or sometimes to Canada. At no time did the railroad have a central leadership. Not one person or group of people were ever in charge. Disregarding the lack of structure, the Underground Railroad managed to achieve dramatic results. The fugitives would often wear disguises and would be led along the railroad by conductors. Many times fugitives had no other guideposts but the stars. They would stop during the day at stations owned by abolitionists called station masters. These people hid and fed the fugitives. Harriet Tubman was an American abolitionist and political activist. Born into slavery, Tubman escaped and made 13 missions to rescue approximately 70 enslaved people, family, and friends, using the network of anti-slavery activists and safe houses known as the Underground Railroad. At one time, the reward for her capture climbed to about $40,000, a large amount of money at the time. When Tubman escaped slavery in 1849, she left behind her family, but swore she would return and lead her whole family to freedom in the North. She returned to the South 19 times, successfully leading her family and more than 300 slaves to freedom. Enslaved African Americans followed many routes to escape from Southern slavery. Once in the free states, however, fugitive slaves could not be certain of their freedom. U.S. law still considered them as property, and bounty hunters were paid to capture and return any fugitives found. Slave revolts were a big part of the abolitionist movement by sending a violent message to slave owners. Slave revolts included Nat Turner's Rebellion in Virginia and Denmark Vesey's attempted rebellion in Charleston, South Carolina. Nat Turner's Rebellion. Nat Turner was a slave preacher who led a slave revolt in Virginia of 1831. Turner had a crew of about 50 to 60 men, and they killed as much slave owners and slave-owning families as they could while freeing slaves. Denmark Vesey was a former slave who bought his freedom. He was a smart man who spoke many languages. Vesey had a well-organized slave revolt in 1822 that included about 2,000 to 9,000 slaves. Vesey was betrayed by a house slave who told authorities about him and his uprising. He was captured along with other known conspirators for their planned revolt. In conclusion, passed by Congress on January 31, 1865, and ratified on December 6, 1865, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in the United States. The 13th Amendment, which formally abolished slavery in the United States, passed the Senate on April 8, 1864, and the House on January 31, 1865. From powerful speeches to anti-slavery newspaper, to the extreme measures of violence people made, their voices heard and implanted fear into the government and slaveholders.